Hello, everybody. I've realized that I did not post a video last week. It was International Women's Day, and we had a speaker in from California for the Unslut Project. And I guess the week got away on me. I had intended to do it, and it was on my list, and I'm not sure how I didn't get that done. So, last week you were looking at ecofeminism and feminist spirituality. And this is actually one of the areas that I have studied sort of extensively. I did my master's on feminist spirituality and female sexuality. So, the couple of the people I included in that chapter um, really, I feel like, are relevant to the discussion at hand. Kind of, there are some fairly key players in the discussion about those two sort of areas, but also just in general in terms of the social climate that we're living in. Certainly, we know that we are operating in within an environmental crises these days, and it's possible, I think, for us to make different choices and to do something differently. And often, because women are on the front lines of caretaking, um, often on the front lines of agricultural work, certainly in countries where that work is more hands-on and less technologized, women are at the forefront, and so quite often women notice the effects of environmental degradation more quickly than other people might, because they're right at the very front, but also because they're the caretakers, right? So in terms of provision of food and water, they see those effects right away in themselves and in their family members when they can't get what they need, or when water is contaminated, for example. So quite critically, I think women have a role to play where addressing environmental concerns is concerned, but also because so much of the women's movement has been really about grassroots activism, right? All of the really big changes and these movements that turn into international movements, so many of them start with a few women locally, right, gathering to discuss something that they have identified as being highly problematic and something that they can't sit idly by and do nothing about. And so they meet, they gather, they start marshaling resources, and all of a sudden a movement is born. And now, with social media being what it is, it spreads like wildfire, and all of a sudden you've got an international grassroots movement of women who are really seeking to address some fairly significant issues, and both where female sexuality is concerned, as well as the environment. This is certainly the case. So Vandana Shiva has a really a take on the environment and what we sort of need to be doing differently, and a kind of a framework that we need to be applying in our daily lives in terms of politics and policies and the way that we live, each of us, in our own sort of lives. She talks about living cultures. This is really about environmental justice. It's about furthering the equality agenda, but that is not just for certain groups of people, right? That's for the earth itself as well, and all of the beings that live on it. That there is a way to live sustainably, and that justice actually requires that we all be able to live sustainably, and that all life be able to flourish. If we don't change our attitudes and adopt some of that, we simply aren't going to have a planet left to live on. Some of the things that we are seeing, they're starting to be quite alarming. This particular winter in Saskatchewan, I would say, is indicative of the fact that climate change is very real. And while lots of us feel a small amount of relief, or maybe a large degree of relief, about not having to go outside in minus 45, the same token, going outside and feeling the really sort of warm weather makes me feel like it's nice that it's so nice out. And also, am I going to have to wear my parka in July? Right? Because it's very unsettling. This is not normal. These kinds of weather patterns aren't normal. And there are repercussions to be felt, or it simply cannot sustain this kind of ongoing trauma, I suppose. Further, this stuff is really relevant in terms of Canada right now, with the Canadian economy, particularly provinces like Alberta and like Saskatchewan that are so rich in oil and so oil dependent in so many ways in terms of employment, right? We've seen record numbers of people unemployed. People are losing their homes. It's a really difficult time. By the same I'm sympathetic. I have family who works in oil and always have. Makes me really uncomfortable, but there it is. At the same time, this day was always coming. Our dependency on fossil fuels and on oil, in terms of our own economy, has to be adjusted. We have to adjust, we have to change, we need to roll with the punches and start looking at clean energy and alternative sources. That will also produce jobs, right, while simultaneously helping us to address the fallout of what we've been up to for the last number of decades. And so I think the sooner that we get on that page and recognize the sort of large-scale trauma that the Earth is sustaining and get off of this dependency, start looking for new ways to sustain ourselves that don't compromise the ability of every single other life form and most other countries to live sustainably, the better off we're going to be and the better our communities will be, because they will have also, they'll be sustaining less trauma. Increase in jobs and increase in new green technologies is going to further open opportunities. It'll open trade with other countries, right? We need to reduce our emissions. There are a number of things at play here, and people like Vandana Shiva who speak really clearly to life, right? This is about preserving the diversity of life, not a particular political agenda that's aligned with a particular country or a particular industry. And it's part of why I find her so effective. We had her here at the university last year. We brought her to speak, and she's so smart. She did her PhD here in Canada in quantum physics. She's like brilliant, brilliant mind, and a lovely, lovely human being. In a film called The Shape of Water, she talks about the Suez company trying to divert waters from the Ganges River, right, this dam that they're going to make. And at the very end, after, sort of the film goes through what this project looks like and the women who are protesting it, at the very end, she talks about how, in true feminist fashion, the Ganga refused to do what was sort of requested of it. And it's without this, so much of environmental politics is charged with this idea that it's full of hostility, and if it's feminist, it's anti-man. She is the embodiment of something completely opposite of the stereotype, right, of what environmental justice has often gotten painted as. And her level of intellect, her terrifying level of engagement, her willingness to commit and actively participate in creating positive change make her an excellent, excellent resource for investigating this particular subject. So, I've included one of those readings in your chapters, but I would encourage you to search out some videos and other readings of hers, because she's done a really brilliant job at making this stuff accessible and inviting, I think, right? She took on Rice Tech, which a company that sought to patent basmati rice, which has been growing in India, forever. And they won. She won, right? Her cause, her people, the people she was fighting on behalf of, defeated a giant, sort of global corporation that is seeking to really co-opt life in the form of basmati rice. And it sent a really powerful message, I think, about what grassroots activism can do and what the value of diversity of life is, and that seeds and trees and plants, the diversity in which life already grows on this planet, is something we absolutely need to be protecting rather than exploiting, patenting, and modifying. So that's relevant for the food that we're taking into our bodies, the levels of disease that we're seeing. And I say disease because it's both dis-ease, a lack of ease within our environment and within our bodies, and also disease because there's a lack of wellness, right? And sort of an infiltration of chemicals and modified organisms that we're not compatible with. And so in this way, this part of a feminist project, if you will, is really significant to your generation, to my generation. I have a child, right? I'm going to have grandchildren, I hope, and it's about leaving the world better than we found it, and it's about undoing or repairing some of the damage that has been done, right, if we want to continue life as we know it on this planet. And so this is about justice for everyone, right? For the planet and for all of us that live on it. And to her sort of principles, the 10 principles that are listed in your lecture, for me, offer a way in to a movement and a political way of thinking about the world and operating in the world that really makes sense and it is hard to refute, and that I see really as an invitation to participate in being a good steward of the world that we're all living in. And so anyways, I hope that you're enjoying or have enjoyed that portion of this lecture. Secondarily, the chunk on feminist spirituality, I have found that to be a really interesting avenue of investigation, particularly because we live in a patriarchal world where the policing and monitoring and controlling of women has really sort of formed the heart and the foundation of all of our systems, our economic system, our political system, our justice system, and where it's really difficult for women to navigate because we're not seen as full participants, and because the bodies we live in are seen as both a threat to the patriarchal order, and our sexuality simultaneously presents the same kind of threat. And so the response has been to seek to control it in ways that are often very damaging to women and deny women the ability, like I said, to participate fully as autonomous beings with access to self-determination, the right to self-determination, and bodily integrity. So when we think about living in a rape culture like we do now, for example, female sexuality is really at the crux of that. And often we hear arguments around, what was she wearing? Where was she going? Why was she out that late? Why would she have gone with those people? Why was she drinking? How much did she drink? Are we sure that it was, rape? Was this just sex that she regretted the next day? This is all over our social media in a way it never has been before, thanks to social media, right? It's part of our sort of consciousness now in a way that it never has been. But also what women do after the fact, right? If there's been an assault, how women behave in the aftermath also largely determines the kind of justice that they're going to receive. And wrapped up in all of this is this idea that women's sexuality makes them corrupt, carnal, not trustworthy, unable to tell the truth, and objects of suspicion. We have to be suspicious about what women say about their own lives and with their own experiences. We have to ask them questions. They can't totally be trusted to know the truth, to tell the truth about what's happened to them, and to know for themselves, right? To make decisions for themselves, but also to know what their experiences have been. This is highly problematic, and we see it play out time and time and time again. Whether it's a domestic violence case, why does she stay? If it's a sexual assault, are we sure that it was an assault? She went willingly. She didn't kick and scream. It doesn't matter that she was drunk. Maybe she wanted to. Maybe she just regrets it in the aftermath, because she was drunk. She just wishes that it hadn't been the case. If it was really assault, why would she have contacted him after the fact? Why would she be pursuing a relationship? And in fact, there is no right way to be a victim. It doesn't actually matter what women do in the aftermath of an assault. More often than not, the results are the same. And that is because there's a cultural investment in viewing women as objects of suspicion, as untrustworthy, and as dangerous and threatening to this particular social order. That's largely due to their sexuality, right? Being associated with that which is base and carnal and sort of on the low end, right? They're in terms of low and high, right? In mind and body. Women are always associated with the side of the dichotomy that is, or the binary that is thought of as less than, and in need of policing and control and monitoring these kinds of things. When we talk about feminist spirituality, it has evolved out of this refusal to participate anymore in a system that denigrates women, women's bodies, and women's experiences of their sexuality. And so coming out of the 70s, right, out of the women's movement of consciousness raising groups, there was a real effort to choose something new, to say I can have a relationship with God, with my God, within a particular tradition, or with the goddess, right? I'm going to revision this sort of entirely anew. Regardless of what tradition somebody is part of, the agenda has been to reclaim female sexuality, female spirituality, what it means to be female. And we now know that calling women, right, women's experiences and what it means to be female, not really helpful, because women experience their lives and their lived realities in all kinds of different ways, dependent on where they're situated in terms of race and sexual orientation, geography and class, all of these things. But when this movement really took root, it was about the recognition that female sexuality was a prime site of oppression for women, and that women didn't want that anymore. They wanted to live in their bodies, and they wanted to be able to experience their sexuality in a positive way. And so this movement has evolved. There's all kinds of different branches. Feminist spirituality is just a big umbrella. Starhawk's been one of the most vocal, and one of the sort of pagans or Wiccans or earth goddess worshippers, if you will, that has some street cred, so to speak. She's highly political in terms of both women and the environment. Anti-capitalist, big, loud voice for environmental justice, and simultaneously an alternative way of operating in the world, right? So she lives in a commune. She operates within a social group where they work really hard to fight against traditional gender norms, right, and gender identities and constructions of gender and sex and race. That said, she's operating within the social body the same way that all of us do, and so is it a perfect alternative way of operating? Of course not. But what it is a conscious attempt to do things differently and to vision something new, right? To have a new concept of what it means to be sexual, of how fluid sexuality can be, of how fluid gender can be, that these things aren't rooted in nature and that they're not a definitive one-way street where this is the only way that it can be and this is the way that it has to be and that we have no options, right? Her movement and her voice have really been a strong pushback and an attempt to construct a new narrative that is more liberating, that recognizes and encourages diversity in identity, in sexuality, and that challenges this patriarchal social order that says women are always less than. Gender's very rigid. You can't move back and forth. You experience sexuality in this way and this way only. Her way of living and operating in the world has really been a conscious attempt to say, I don't buy that. And I'm living proof that you can walk in this world in an alternative way, that it's doable, that it's possible. And is that a struggle? Is it some work? Of course it is. It's not necessarily my way, but certainly there are things about her particular path that I find really liberating and very attractive and really helpful, because when the spiral dance came out in the 70s, it was very much, polarized viewpoint where masculinity and femininity are concerned. In the intervening years, Starhawk has been willing to interrogate her own position, right, and to evolve and open up that dialogue, and now no longer really subscribes to that idea, right? It's a much more fluid idea, and her movement is very welcoming of men as well. And again, valuing the goddess doesn't come at the expense of valuing the god, right? They operate together. This is about the renewal of cycles and seasons and growth and rebirth and death, all things that are totally natural and that happen in this world all the time, but seeing that both the god and the goddess have a role to play and that those are equally important. In terms of worshiping the goddess for this particular group, I think it's a way of pushing back against a world that has really been so very patriarchal and so very anti-woman in its constructs, in its policies, in its systems, that to revalue the goddess and give her a place of primacy at this particular juncture in history really is just seeking to recognize the value of that which is feminine, again, in a world that has largely ignored that and in fact suggested the opposite, right? That the feminine is just dangerous and suspicious and concerning and needs to be controlled. And so there are things, I think, that are useful to us as tools in terms of the framework and the approach where looking at the social world we're currently operating in is concerned, like this rape culture business. We have this Jian Ghomeshi stuff going on. Rehtaeh Parsons just died a few years ago here, at 16 or 15 after having been slut-shamed in the aftermath of a gang rape by her peers. And she was the perfect victim. She went to the police. She, in the immediate aftermath, did all of the things that she was supposed to, and justice was not on her side, and charges weren't laid, and she paid the ultimate price, right? We need to talk about these things. We need to think about where this comes from, and we need to believe that it's possible to do things differently, to construct a new vision of what it means to be female, a new vision of female sexuality, one that doesn't include this Madonna whore business, that doesn't center on the idea of a slut, and question women for what they were doing in a way that men never are, and in a way that necessarily puts women at risk. The real value, I think, of the work that Starhawk has done is that it offers hope that it can be different, and it's proof that we can choose a different path. We can construct new ways of being and thinking about who we are and about what our sexuality is, that doesn't involve monitoring and policing ourselves and other people, and violence, right? The violence doesn't have to be part of how we experience our bodies and our sexuality, particularly as women. So I hope, I know it's late because you've already probably done all of that reading, but I wanted you to have that information so that as you sort of mull it over and think about it, it can maybe inform how you see these two, schools of thought, and help you to apply it to the world that you're currently living in, and to what you see happening in your world. I'm going to post another video, I'm hoping either later today or tomorrow, dealing with visual culture and domination. Also, I'm working on your papers, so you will be getting those back. The other thing that's really important for you to know is that I leave on Saturday, March 19th, for a week. I will not be in the country. I will not be getting your emails. So if you have questions about your film paper, you need to get them to me before Friday. And if you have troubles, then you can wait and hand it in after the fact. I'll be back the following Saturday late, so I will check my email on Sunday the 27th, and I'll be back in the office on the 28th of March. So if there's any problem with your paper, then you can hand it in, email it to me after that, and I can upload it to turn it in for you. Hope that you're having a good week. Hope that you all have a great International Women's Day, and I will see you again in our conversation about global or domination and visual culture here just shortly. Okay? Take care.